This is Grafted Together.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Grafted Together podcast. My name is Douglas Campbell, and I'm the ministry team senior coordinator at ACSI. And a part of my role is not only do I have the opportunity to lead our internal staff in spiritual formation and discipleship, but I also get to work with several of our school leaders in the space of spiritual formation and discipleship in the schools that God has called them to be a part of. And so in order for us to best support and connect to our school leaders, we created the Spiritual Formation Network. And you've probably heard a little bit about this on the podcast, as Jerry's mentioned that and advertised a little bit about that. But that network is made up of school leaders in our ACSI schools who have been entrusted with spiritual formation and discipleship in their school. So it could be a head of school, it could be a principal, it could be a teacher, it could be a spiritual formation director. But whoever is the champion of that and has been given that role and the responsibility to help lead their students and create those support systems to bring about spiritual growth at their school. And so at the heart of this network is a desire to come alongside school leaders and support them in creating an intentional framework for discipleship within their school. And we call this framework the Spiritual Formation Journey Map. Now, I don't have a visual to display for you, and for those of you guys listening, you'll just kind of have to hear through these destination markers. But this map is made up of really 4 destination markers, and these are 4 ingredients that we believe are a part of spiritual formation within the school context. Expected student outcomes, assessment, training and support, and caring for others in hardship. And so what we've been doing through the Spiritual Formation Network this year is we have our quarterly meetings. So we had a meeting in September, we had a meeting in November, and each of those quarterly meetings is focused on one of those topics. And so for this fall semester, we've really focused on expected student outcomes, what those are, what those mean, and how those can really guide us in what we're doing at our schools. And then we also spent some time talking about spiritual assessment and asking the questions of, well, how do we assess spiritual formation? And then how do we use that data to best inform how we go about the things that God has called us to do and helping our students, our staff, and our parents grow in spiritual formation. So today, I've got the honor and the privilege of having some of our spiritual formation core group. Within this network, we have a group of core group leaders who are really driving the initiative and driving the network. And so not only are they guests today on the podcast, but they're also friends that I get to walk with in ministry. And so I'm very excited to have them on with us today. So Sam, Sean, and Laurie, thank you guys for joining the podcast today. We are very excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Appreciate it.
So what we'll do as we start today, we're really just going to spend some time talking through expected student outcomes and assessment and how those things play out in our schools. We're also going to talk a little bit about just the value of the Spiritual Formation Network and what we're seeing within spiritual formation in our schools. And so as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, that's really going to be the thing that we're really going to center and focus on today during this podcast. And we hope it's insightful for everyone who's listening or watching today. But what I want to do first is I want to give each of these leaders an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with Samantha, and she's just going to tell us a little bit about who she is, where she's from, school she works at, and then we'll go to Sean, and then we'll go to Laurie afterwards. So Sam.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Douglas. So I'm Sam, and I am the chaplain at Oaks Christian Online, so a little bit different. So we are an online program for 6th through 12th grade students, and we provide classes and community for other Christian schools, actually. And we also serve a full-time student population of our own as well. And so my role in the program is to kind of generate and inspire and cultivate spiritual formation opportunities for students, faculty, and staff in this virtual space. And then also to oversee what we call theological engagement, which is kind of our unique way of dialoguing about biblical themes, truths, and understandings about who God is kind of across our courses. So we do offer, of course, Bible courses, but then within our other courses as well, we have theological engagement that I get to kind of dig into. And then I also teach. So I teach Bible once in a while, English if we really need it. But otherwise, yeah, I just get to kind of be a part of those parts of the school.
Awesome, Sam. Thanks for sharing that. Sean?
Yeah, hey everyone. Sean Englert, and I get the opportunity to serve as Director of Spiritual Life at Northlake Christian School, which is in Covington, Louisiana. It's just outside of New Orleans. I've been here, this is my 11th year. I had a break after the first 5. We lived in Pittsburgh for a few years, and then we returned in 2020. And so in my role, I get to oversee all things spiritual life from pre-K through 12th grade. So that includes things like chapels and retreats to community service and student leadership development. I also get to oversee the Bible curriculum in the Bible department. New this year, we recently went through a change in leadership in August. And so I'm also currently serving as an interim co-head of school right now. So that's been a little bit different. It's been fun though, been enjoying the opportunities that has provided. See more about me. Married, wife, 19 years, best friend. She's awesome. Have 2 kids, Jade, who's 8, and a son who's is 3 years old. And we have an early learning center here on campus, so the whole family's here. My wife is assistant principal in the elementary, daughter's in 2nd grade, and our son's at the ELC. So it's nice to all be on one campus together.
That's awesome, Sean. I'm sure that you enjoy the warmer weather of New Orleans than the colder weather in Pittsburgh. Maybe. Maybe not much
Maybe.
humidity. I don't know.
We hit mid-80s yesterday. Our air conditioner at home went out, and so we had to do a minor repair to that. Thankfully, it wasn't major, but I'm wishing for a little bit of fall weather right now. Even just the change of the leaves would be nice. So hoping to get some cooler temperatures soon.
I hear you. I hear you. I hope you do as well. All right. And then Lori.
Hi, I'm Laurie LaFon. I am with Lucas Christian Academy. We are actually a hybrid model school. We go from pre-K to 12. We've been around about 26, 27 years, and we go to school Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then we have satellite school or a homeschool on Tuesday, Thursday, where the parents are the primary instructors and facilitators with their schoolwork. So we've personally, our family, been a part of the community for about 22 years. And so we had our oldest start in kindergarten, and we've got 4 kids who we have graduated, and our youngest just this last May. So we're officially, well, I won't say empty nesters because they're still living with us, but we're on the recycle program. But I've been in this position as the director of student life for 8 years now. And my primary responsibility is really working with 7th to 12th grade students. There's about 230 students. We have about 460 in the entire school. And so really, my responsibilities go anywhere from the spiritual formation side of things, as far as leading our chapel programs. We call it Higher Ground. We do chapel every day that we're on campus, which is 3 days a week. And then our retreats, our small group discipleship, all of our student leadership and development, and also all of our fun events. So our homecoming and all of our fun big things. We always say fun is the on-ramp to deeper spiritual engagement. So we really try to make sure we're having lots of fun. So I have the best job ever. So yes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's interesting. I really, as I, asked you guys to be on the podcast today, I didn't even think about the fact that each of you is in a different model of school. We've got someone who represents an online model. We've got someone who represents just the traditional 5 days a week. And then we've got Lori, you represent the hybrid. So it's cool how God worked that out, right? So praise him for that. So we'll get to kind of hear a different perspective as we talk a little bit about expected student outcomes and assessments today. So again, thank you guys so much for being here today and being on the podcast. I'm excited to dive into some of these questions and hear your heart on some of these things. But as I mentioned, we've been talking through this idea of expected student outcomes. Maybe you've called those a portrait of a graduate. Every school, I think, has maybe a different way they use that term, but really it's these spiritual goals that you hope at the end of a student's time at your school, they will begin to exemplify or exhibit some of this fruit. Now, we know that the Holy Spirit must work in the heart of each student. But as spiritual formation directors and those who have been called in this place, I think one thing that's key is that we understand that our job is to put the kindling around the heart, to lay the bricks or to plant the seeds. And we pray that God would bring those things to growth. And so we're always wanting to, build into the storehouse. And so we know that expected student outcomes does not mean that, hey, every kid's going to have a developed biblical worldview and every kid's going to be following Jesus and every kid's going to be exactly where they need to get or need to be when they graduate. But we at least want to create the environments for spiritual formation and discipleship to emerge and for students to be ambassadors of Christ. And so we want to focus a little bit about that. So to set the stage today, the first question, Laurie, I want to ask you this question. Why are expected student outcomes and desired spiritual formation goals important for Christian schools? And how have they shaped the way you lead or work with students, staff, or parents in your school?
Well, that's a big question. And just to kind of back up and give maybe a little bit of history, our school, because it is a hybrid model school, it was formed really by a lot of foundational parents, and it was formed with what we would call our roots. And so we had 7 different roots, and those were really our guiding principles, and they were very well thought out and supported biblically. And so there was this just complete holistic idea around who we are, what we do, our identity, and then that was really carried forth. And then as our school began to grow, we really, and there was a lot of leadership change. We've actually just recently, this last year, really transferred those from our roots over to what we're calling, it's an acronym, our mascot is Warrior. So each one of those roots has now been identified with the WARR and so forth. And so just, again, I think bring clarity around really some of the new leadership, and it really informs everything that we do, making sure that we are, I think the process of developing those and refining those is just as important as the outcome, because as you're wrestling with those as your leadership team, you're getting input from your department heads, your parents, your students, they're all have an investment in that process. And so that part's actually been really cool to see it all fleshed out. I won't say it's not radically different. In fact, it really incorporated our original roots, but it's in, I think, a little bit more understandable and just common language that we can use from kindergarten all the way up through our seniors in high school. So I think that's the why. I think the challenge now is making sure that we're vertically aligned and then horizontally aligned throughout all of our different programmings and curriculum and so forth. So really, that's kind of our next step. We've gotten to the point where we have shared this with our parents and helped them understand, again, this is the target. If you don't have a target, you don't know where you're going. You're all over the place. And so for us in student life, what that means is it really informs every decision, all of our programming, our entire framework. Our own department mission is to make and grow disciples through intentional programs and authentic relationships with students. And so, our core tenets are to believe, to belong, to grow, and to serve. And so everything we do supports that. We even have just kind of questions. If it's not aligning with our identity, we call it kind of our ROI, return on investment, then we know we've got some really, we have to be really good stewards of those resources and, personnel, financial, all of those things are time. And so making sure that we're really aligning with all of those things that we've said that are important. And if it doesn't really hit the mark on some of those areas, then we say, okay, maybe we just need to table that for right now. We're never afraid to change or modify what we're doing. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. As you're talking about some of those things that, educational world, we always say begin with the end in mind, right? Which is really important. But I really like how your school has emphasized not only are the outcomes important, which they are, but even the process of building those out are really important for not only for us as leaders, but for our students, for our staff, for our parents. And that way people kind of say, hey, if you're a part of this family, you're a part of this community, this is what we're hoping for. This is what we're trying to sow into. And so I love what you guys have done at Lucas in really kind of building those out. And I guess your name is the Warriors, you said, right? The Warriors?
Yes.
Right. So that could be easier than maybe a longer word, or maybe if your mascot is really short, then it might be easier. I don't know. I feel like every Christian school is the Eagles. That's kind of like the standard name out there. So so that's really great. That's good to hear. Sam or Sean, do you guys have anything to add to that question?
Lori, I had a question, Lori. Just you had mentioned the process that you are kind of open to bringing people and including people into that, whether it's faculty or staff or parents. How have y'all have you seen increase in engagement because of that? And if so, like in what ways?
That's a good
Well, I
question.
think just the nature of the model of our school, because we are really we partner with parents in every facet of the education. You know, they are the actual teachers on Tuesday, Thursday. So I think that just sort of lends itself to just a natural level of engagement and just expectation that we're all really in partnership together. And so I do think it has helped. I think it's just helped align us and bring all of our focus into a common place to where we're all shooting toward the same target. I mean, there's amazing things that we could all be doing, but we know we're not going to be able to do all of those things. So what are we really going to focus on?
That's good. That's good. Anybody else have anything to add to this question on expected student outcomes? All right, so let's move on then. When a school defines its spiritual formation outcomes clearly, the question we want to ask is for Sean. I'm going to ask you first. So when a school defines its spiritual formation outcomes clearly, how does that help clarify our roles as a leader? How does it bring focus to the ministry God has called us to, and how does it keep us from drifting into complacency? So let's start with that part of the question first, and then we can move into another piece of that question.
Sure. So as you kind of alluded to earlier, every school has a portrait of a graduate or this desired outcome that they have for their students once they uh, finish their careers in your school. And much like Laurie said, those are our targets. Those are the things that we want to kind of hone in and focus on. And our school's no different. We have three values that we really hold close to. And what we decided a few years ago is that we're just going to spend time rotating through those three values and spend a whole year really focusing in on one, and then next year we'll go to the next one, and then the year after that we go to the third one, and then we hop back again, back to the beginning. But and those values complement one another, so it's not that we're ignoring the other two, but it just gives us time to really hone in on a particular value that we hold near and dear to our hearts, and we want to see our students embody out in the world once they graduate. And so, what that does for us is it gives us the added attention to that value that maybe a full school year provides the opportunity for. So, for instance, the value we're really focusing on this year is leading courageously,
Mm,
and that is what everything is pointing towards. And so, we'll get to the complacency part in a second, but we set that out in the beginning of the year that we want to highlight that value and focus on it. And so then that becomes where we start building the framework for all of our programs and activities. And how do we attach the things that happen naturally in the rhythm of our calendars? So we have retreats in the fall, we have chapels once a week, we have service opportunities, popping up all the time. How do we latch those things that are regularly occurring to the framework that really connects to the outcome for the student that we want to see? And so we begin sort of game planning what that looks like. We start doing that in the spring before the upcoming school year. So in just a few months, we'll be doing that for the 26-27 school year. And I get
mhm.
to do that with a bunch of faculty members who are near and dear friends of mine. And we sit down and we start laying out a game plan for that. And so one of the things in doing this for a few years now that we've learned is that 9 or 10 months of a school year is a really long time. And when you only have one message that you're focusing on, it could get a little stale, and complacency, that word kind of kicks in. And so a way that we sort of try to keep this fresh is we have the student outcome focus for the year that we're really driving towards in all of our messaging, but then we break it up month by month. So what is September going to look like that really helps emphasize that message? And then how's that going to be different from October? And then how is October different from November? And so
Good.
we
Yeah.
begin to try to create a framework it starts with the whole year in mind, but then as you kind of take a step into it, then it gets down to month by month. And then once we have that, we look at the month and we break it up into week by week. And so, hey, for this first week of October, what are we really trying to, tackle and hit on? And so that begins the process for us of really creating an outline that helps, I guess, eliminate complacency, because it's giving you a different take on that attribute or that student outcome, almost on a weekly basis. And then everything we do from a programming standpoint will emphasize or highlight the focus for that week, which then complements the outcome for the year. And so it just kind of all fits in that
Yeah.
framework. And I don't know if that's the best way to do it. It's a way that we've kind of gone about doing things the last few years that I think has helped things stay fresh, kind of helped
Yeah.
students stay engaged throughout the whole time with this. It also provides opportunities for bringing students into the process. When you're teaching, you realize really quickly that you're not cool anymore, and
No way. No way.
you're at a
Crazy.
certain age that
Crazy.
like kids are just like, I don't really, you don't grab my attention as much as you used to back in
Hey,
the
you
day.
just got to
So,
say 6'7" and they'll think you're the coolest thing.
right, yeah.
Who,
My
who knew?
3-year-old's even
Who
doing
knew two
that at
numbers
home.
would be
It's
so
crazy.
All it
trendy?
took.
Insane. Crazy.
Um, but this process sort of allows us to plan for student involvement. So as things are popping up in the fall semester where we're recognizing students respond, and we're starting to see kind of the fruit of the seeds that we've been planting kind of sprouting, and see that fruit a little bit, then we start tagging students for those opportunities in the spring, maybe even sooner. And it just increases the engagement even more, because they will listen to their peers a whole lot more than they'll listen to me or anyone else in the adult world. So anyway, that's a little bit of our approach to it. I think it helps with the complacency piece. I'm not saying it's the best way, but it's something that we found that's been helpful and effective.
Yeah, man, that's really good. I think when you bring students into the initiatives, it also not only, I think, well, I guess the big thing is it creates a, a responsibility, right?
Mhm.
So students realize that, hey, I have a role here. I'm not just someone who has to, come to class, listen to what's being told, but like I have a piece of this. And then they become a little more responsible. They realize, hey, this has been entrusted to me as well, and it's something I can be a part of. And I think that all feeds into helping us, or us as leaders helping our students say, hey, we not only care about you, but you're a part of what we're doing here. And
Yeah,
it's all
for
about,
sure.
hey, this is the role God has given you. So I really enjoy some things you said on that. That's awesome. The other part of this question, and then Sam, if you have anything to share in any parts of this at all, you can. But the other part of this question was, what are some potential pitfalls or downsides that schools should be aware of when it comes to establishing expected student outcomes? Either of you have any thoughts on some possible downsides or pitfalls with expected student outcomes?
Yeah, so as I kind of mentioned earlier, a year is a long time. And sometimes when you're focused on one aspect of maybe the portrait of the graduate, or those values that your school holds near and dear, it could get a little old and a little stale. And I think student apathy towards it is something
Mm,
to just be aware of. And that's why I think
yeah,
it's important to keep the same message, but maybe refresh the ways in which you deliver that message, so that it's new, and not from like a consumer mentality where you're trying to do things with like smoke and mirrors or whatever, but really think through, hey, I want this to be received really well. And knowing your students, knowing the climate of the school, how can I package this message in a way that really hits and lands, so that students are hearing what is being said, and being flexible to maybe move away from a plan if you realize the plan you have in place is not helping with that outcome. So just being flexible in that. The other thing that I had to learn over my time in this role, and I think I'm still learning this, is that progress like this happens really slowly. I think when I
agree.
was first in this role, I would get real frustrated with, you know, not seeing the results in the student body that I really wanted, or was
Mhm.
praying really hard for, or desiring. And I think the way God's really softened my heart and just kind of taught me patience along the way is that the overall change that you're going for is something that happens incrementally, and it's just being consistent and faithful, being obedient to what you feel like God's called you to, knowing at the end of the day that you just were a good steward of those opportunities, and maybe where you missed a spot, correcting that for the next day. But really, there's this piece where uh, you have to leave it up to God on some level. Like there's
Yeah,
we can set the
absolutely.
conditions and we can cultivate and
That's right.
I love, that Adam in Genesis 2, he was a gardener.
Yeah.
What a great first profession for humanity because as a metaphor in all things, I mean, we set conditions so that things grow. And so whether it's making sure the soil is fertile or making sure that we're pulling out weeds or making sure that water is getting to where it needs to go, understanding that that takes a lot of work and a lot of time and it's not something that might happen overnight. And it's something that you're in it for the long run and being okay with that. I think learning that lesson for me was really important.
Yeah, and that's good. If we could take that and then just inject it into the veins of our leaders, I think that's so key because it's so true. I remember as a school leader, I dealt with those same feelings of like, Lord, we're doing this. What's going on? But then I think about scripture and you think about the prophets. Think about Isaiah, who is called to go. He says, whom shall I send? Who will go for me? And here's Isaiah saying, send me, Lord. And right after, it's insane because right after that, God is saying, okay, I'm going to send you to a people who's not going to listen. They're stubborn, they're stiff necked, they're not going to hear you. And then Isaiah's question back to the Lord is not, oh, well, maybe I don't want to go now, Lord. It was, how long, oh Lord? So Isaiah steps into this knowing what's to come, and yet he still continues to plod along and be faithful to the mission that God had given him. So that's such a key part of what we do within the spiritual formation space at our school. Sam, anything to add? Not even maybe on this question, but just kind of this. I think this conversation that Sean has brought up because I think it's something we could spend a little bit of time talking about before we move on to the next part of this.
Yeah, I was going to first of all say thank you, Sean, for admitting that sometimes this can become a little bit rote, a little bit cumbersome, a little bit maybe even tiring. I think this is definitely a risk to manage when we, get deep in the weeds of working through student outcomes or kind of strategic planning around spiritual formation. It can start to feel like there's just so much and it just gets to be a little bit laborious sometimes if we aren't kind of holding ourselves accountable to have really, really simple and digestible and practical pieces to this, especially those of us who are particularly theologically minded. We can get a little wordy with some of this and all of a sudden
Amen. Amen.
we're right. And all of a sudden we're showing teachers, a 27-page chart that has all this stuff. And they're just kind of like, okay, I'm just trying to get through my day to get to lunch. Like,
Yeah.
I can't really digest all of this. And so I wanted to just offer a simple example that we do at our school, just as some bite-sized examples of how to play this out. So I love the language that Sean was talking about cultivation and a garden, and I love that image, an image that we use at school that is similar and yet also different is the language around invitation. So what I like to think a lot about as a part of our team is adequate invitation. So if we are hoping that students are going to become people of prayer or are going to try to care well for their neighbors in their neighborhood or whatever the sort of hope is that we have for students, I like to think about that we are held accountable to provide an adequate invitation. So again, let's get really in the weeds and granular about this just to kind of wrap our minds around it. So you guys invited me to be a part of this podcast, which was very lovely. If you had said to me like, hey, Sam, we'd love to have you to be a part of this podcast. It's going to be at 3:00 in the morning. I hope that's okay. Like, love to have you. It's kind of like, okay, I get that you wanted me to be a part of this, but that's not a very hospitable invitation, right? You haven't kind of controlled the variables in such a way where I could potentially say yes to that, right? On the flip side, if you had said, hey, Sam, we really want you to be a part of this podcast, like, seriously, even if it needs to be at 3 a.m., like I'm going to jump in and do that, then it's kind of like, okay, you've overextended the invitation in such a way where now I have no opportunity to kind of have skin in the game myself, right? A certain level of challenge myself. And so thinking about that language of invitation at our school helps us to care about balancing hospitality and also an appropriate challenge, right? We want students to be able to grow, and that requires challenge, but we also want to make sure that we're being hospitable enough that when we're providing an invitation to grow or to stretch, that it's reasonable, right? It's not outside of their zone of proximity. So again, even more granular, a specific example at our school, by the time that you're a senior in high school, we would like, one of our sort of student outcomes, if you will, is we would like you to be able to name 5 Christian adults that you're going to walk through life with after you graduate. This is a big thing that we really care about. Yeah, this is something that we value. And so through 6th through 11th grade, there are all of these micro opportunities to practice, for example, what we call our 20 seconds of bravery, like the 20 seconds of bravery it takes to introduce yourself to someone. So this is literally something that we practice, is literally how to introduce yourself. Again, if the long-term hope is that a kid will be able to identify an adult, they have to be able to introduce themselves to someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the beginning piece of that. So before I ask a kid to have 5 adults, I have to have provided them an opportunity to learn how to introduce themselves, right? So it's about taking these kind of long-term hopes that we have for kids and thinking about across those years of time, how do we make sure that we provide those opportunities to do that? There's another opportunity in the progression that students are in where they have to interview a Christian adult, right? So it's like, okay, they're at another level where they're not just introducing themselves to someone, they're actually participating in a conversation where they had to ask a question of a Christian adult, right? And so there are all of these micro opportunities to move towards this goal that we have for them as in their senior year, so that by the time that they're a senior, we still have plenty of kids that are like, I really only have 3, Mrs. F. And I'm like, great. And then there's other kids that are like, no, I have 27 now. And I'm like, wow, you did it. But it's like that thing of we have to kind of think about the micro skills that are needed in order for students to even be able to attempt to accept the invitations that we're providing for them. And I think that's really the benefit of this way of thinking, is that it allows us to be able to break these things down into all of their smallest parts for our kids.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. I like the balance of challenging but also hospitable. Hospitality means a lot. I think that's why so many of us like Chick-fil-A. Like, the food's great, but it's a different experience when you go to Chick-fil-A versus when I go to McDonald's. I don't know if it's because the food's better, if you're more of a chicken person over a burger person, or if there's just something about like them saying, "Hey, my pleasure, whatever I can do to serve you." Like, there's something different about it. And I do agree. It's in a lot of spaces when you go to a certain place, and there's just something different about a place that's like, hey, this place has a spirit about it. And a lot of times I think that's that biblical hospitality piece, even if it's not a Christian organization. I think there's something that God has put within us to where we gravitate towards that. So as followers of Christ, especially you guys being in the roles you're in, um, it is a reminder for us that, hey, am I creating spaces of hospitality? And that might mean that, that there might still be some disagreement that happens in those spaces. There could be a conflict of ideas that happens in those spaces. There could be a student who's apathetic or desensitized to the gospel in those spaces. But am I still creating that environment for ambassadors to emerge, or for people to be introduced to Jesus and see what it means to follow him? And so I think that's really important as we talk about outcomes. And so, hey, we could continue talking about this particularly because it's great. It's a great conversation, but I do want to talk a little bit about assessment, and then we're going to just kind of talk through a couple things just to wrap up today. This has been a great conversation so far. So again, thank you guys for being here and doing this. The last piece that we spent some time talking on in this semester is, I think, kind of the boogeyman at times in Christian education. It's the word assessment. We talk about assessing spiritual formation or assessment of discipleship. And, even in our most recent network meeting, our speaker had made a comment that he brought up spiritual assessment at some point, and someone said that spiritual assessment is diabolical. And, it's interesting that he said that. And, but I think without us maybe saying that out loud, we kind of think that at times, that, oh, there's no way I can assess the matters of the heart. And I think when it comes down to it, when you really begin to break down what assessment is, I think we begin to see that it's actually not a boogeyman. It's not anything to be scared of, that there's some simple ways that we can ask questions and we can observe and we can kind of watch those spaces. We can watch our students and we can begin to kind of get a feel for, hey, there's some fruit that's being produced in our lives, or maybe there's some questions that a lot of our students have and we need to really focus on those things. So I think spiritual assessment is not something we need to be scared of. And I think it's also one of those things that doesn't have to be a 50 question test you ask to your students to figure out exactly where they are. And we've got 10% that are this and 10%. It's not really the purpose of it. So I want to talk a little bit on that piece, because I think it's been a really good topic of conversation this semester in our network. But Laurie, I just want to ask you this question on assessment. What types of spiritual formation assessments have you used? What practices have helped you interpret the results well? And then along with that, and again, anyone else can chime into this as well. What have you learned about keeping assessments simple and using it wisely to identify trends, gaps, or areas of needed emphasis? So I know it's a big question, so we can kind of we can unpack that piece by piece if we need to, or just talk on a couple things. But Laurie, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, we do try to, I mean, we keep it very simple. We use a Google form, but we really try to survey our students and get a sense for our most recent event or activity. So for instance, um, after every retreat, we have multiple retreats a year. After every big event like our homecoming, we'll survey our students. We know it has to be short, and we know that it has to be incentivized, usually with ice cream sandwiches for participation.
There
Just
you
being
go.
really real. They'll do anything for an ice cream sandwich.
There you
But
go.
we keep it anonymous, but we have their email addresses. So, but it's really great because unless you evaluate something at the end, you don't know if you're hitting the mark or not. And students can be brutally honest, and we want them to be, not just in conversation, but we also want to have some level of quantitative data to say, how are we doing? And then look at that and start comparing that year over year. It's really something that we've just kind of grown into over the last few years, and recognizing we need to keep the questions to like 3, 4, maybe 5, and then give them sort of open space to share their comments. And then try to keep those questions the same so that we can really, assess year over year kind of how we're doing. So when the other thing that we do is we do the same thing with regard to our chapel. We call that higher ground. And so we'll start at the beginning of the year and say, hey, how would you say your spiritual growth is? How would you say your connection to Jesus is? We put it all in, kid-friendly terms, and, and give them 4 different ways to evaluate that themselves. And then at the end of the year, we'll say, how do you feel like you grew over the last year? Do you feel like you're the same you were last year, or this at the beginning of the year? Do you feel like you're, better, worse, all of those different things, just to make sure we're moving in the right direction. And we'll also say, hey, what's of interest to you? What are those cultural topics that you guys feel like you're wrestling with? And that'll, of course, help us inform our speakers and our discussion topics and things as we have our chapel conversations, our small group discussions, as we're choosing that curriculum for the upcoming year or the upcoming semester. So I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Let me ask you this. What are, just give me one, or, well, you kind of gave me some questions, but yeah, just as example, what are 1 or 2 types of questions you guys ask when you do your assessment?
Okay, so I'm actually pulled some of our examples here. So for our higher ground, again, our chapel will say, how is your relationship with Jesus? You know, are you doing great? We're totally connected. Hey, it could be better. It's not so great. It's pretty stale, along those lines. Usually give them 4 different areas that they can identify. And then which describes your personal growth over the last year. I'm a bit stronger or better than I was earlier in the year. I'm in a good place, which is almost about the same as I was at the beginning of the year. Kind of help them, really
Yeah.
self-assess. And then what do you look most forward to most in higher ground? Is it the worship? Is it the student speakers, small group discussion, prayer time, professional speakers, or just having a break in your day? Um, how are you feeling socially connected to your friends at LCA? Just trying to assess that sense of belonging and value that they're feeling among their peers. And so, I've got a lot of friends. I don't have very many friends. I'm struggling with friendships, and I think that also then helps us identify from a student care piece, maybe some of those students that we really need to kind of zero in on and give additional support. too. Some of the other things we'll ask about, outside of chapel, say at the end of one of our retreats, is we take all of our seniors away at the beginning of the year for a spiritual/leadership retreat, just helping them step into what leadership looks like this year. And so, for instance, the question will say, when arriving at senior launch, how would you describe your spiritual connection with Jesus? How would you describe your class unity and bond? Because that's huge. Leaving senior launch, how would you describe your connection with Jesus? How would you describe your unity and bond as a class? And then, of course, we give them lots of opportunities to provide all of their comments. And then, let's see, just for instance, with one of our events, our homecoming, it's a whole week-long process where all the classes are involved in different aspects of homecoming. It's a pretty big event. And then it culminates with, excuse me, not only the game, but also our big dance. And did you enjoy the theme? Did your class participate? They have a thing where each class decorates a hallway throughout the school, and it's a big competition, and they earn spirit points. How satisfied were you with the dance? Did you enjoy the DJ and music selections? Did you help enjoy decorating? Just to make sure they're feeling like a place where they can have a lot of fun and just enjoy each other's friendships. And we usually have, I would say, close to 90%, if not more, participation in, an event like homecoming.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very helpful. I think it just shows that we not only can we kind of assess those spiritual matters, but even in just like the life of the school type matters, like you're asking about. I think it just helps us to have a gauge of what's the spirit of the school, where are students at. And I think, all of us in kind of the roles that you guys are in, what's cool about assessments of, hey, where do you feel like you are with the Lord right now? Do you feel like you're growing? Do you feel like you're not? Do you feel like you're stale? Do you feel like it's dry? Whatever it may be. What's so cool is when those opportunities come up, like when you see some of those things, you're able to then have some follow-up conversations, or there could just be some organic conversations that happen in the hallway, happen in a classroom, happen in an office, happen in passing, whatever it may be, where you could easily kind of ask, hey, you mentioned this. Explain that. Like, what do you mean by that? And you come from this, kind of what Sam talked about, this hospitable type of mood and conversation where you're saying, hey, you said this, and I just want to know, like, where do you mean? Like, help me explain that. Sometimes a student can begin to explain it, and then you realize, hey, you said a lot of things that really helped me to see that you are following the Lord. Maybe you're you feel different than what actually is truly, the real thing about where you are right now. And so I think those assessments are really good. And I think that's simple. Just briefly, before we move on to our last couple of questions, Sam or Sean, anything to add on this idea, the topic of assessments?
I would just say, we do formal assessments as well, and that data that we collect definitely helps inform some of the decisions we make for just spiritual life planning related to that. But some of the assessments for me that's been most valuable is just being observant, kind of more informal, looking for the fruits of the spirit evident in the life of your student body. Couple things just last year that stand out. There was a group of guys huddled up in a hallway while classes were changing, and they were blocking everyone, and no one could get around them, and people were bumping. So I walk over to see what's going on, and they were just huddled over one of their friends and laying hands and praying for them.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I was kind of, it was emotional for me just because that was unprompted. Like they did that on their own, and that was just them caring for one another. And so that's spiritual growth. Like what we're seeing, just by being observant. We had Bible studies that, we do Bible studies on a weekly basis, just student led kind of on campus, but those are always facilitated and kind of almost an expectation on some level. But at the end of the school year last year, there was a group of juniors who they didn't want to stop meeting. So over the summer, they kept meeting in homes just on their own, continuing the Bible study. And those types of stories and things, like I said, fruit of the Spirit that you see happening, those are, to me, just as valuable from an assessment side of things as some of the formal data-driven tools that we use.
Yeah, man, that's really good. Really good. Hey, I know we're kind of getting close to the end of our conversation here, but I definitely want to ask a couple of questions that I'd like each of you to speak a little bit into. Just when we talk about the network and spiritual formation and what's going on in our schools. Um, so obviously you guys are a part of this network, and I would say, you guys are a core group. So you're really helping us drive this. We've created this table, but we've really invited you to sit at that table and to help us as ACSI to know, hey, this is what's going on in our schools. This is how we can get better. This is how we can grow. Hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? So it's been a really good conversation with you guys, as we've started out with this network. So as you guys are a part of it, one thing I just wanted to ask is how has that community, or how has this community of the network encouraged you? And then what value do you see in connecting with other leaders doing the same work? Sam, I'm going to start with you and let you answer that question first.
Thank you. Yeah, I love it because honestly, it helps me sleep better at night. Like I think that, we feel again, the kind of person who tends to take on these kinds of roles tends to be somebody who I think has a natural proclivity to want to care and maybe over care about the well-being of
Mhm.
students and faculty and staff. And you can start to kind of feel like you have the whole world on your shoulders. Like, gosh, how am I ever going to pass along, the message of Jesus to the next generation? And we have sort of
Yeah.
all of this pressure. And so just having a space where we're like, oh my gosh, there are like hundreds of us doing this work across the country, potentially thousands. And
Mhm.
we're actually getting a chance to meet each other and to support each other and to pray for each other and to hear from each other and to learn from each other. There's just really no replacement for that, I think, just in terms of being able to feel confident about the work that God is doing broadly in these upcoming generations. I think it can just really be a really great antidote to that sense of like loneliness or carrying it all ourselves that we can sometimes tend to feel when we're, just kind of marching through the weeds of our own thing. I remember Sean was sharing, some of the really beautiful things that he's shared here in the podcast at one of the network gatherings. And I made some kind of joke like, oh, that would never happen on the West Coast, but I'm glad to hear it's happening over there. And like, it was the happiest day. And I told all my friends, like, this is some great thing that's happening in another part of the world that I very rarely frequent. And so it's encouraging. And I think that we can sometimes become so busy and so frenetic in what we're doing and just kind of trying to get through our our week, our month, our year, that we don't take those opportunities to really celebrate and be in kind of this broader community of what God is doing in students' lives. And this is how you tap into that. And so I think it's a little bit become for me a spiritual discipline to be a part of this network where it's not
Mhm.
only just about the leadership part of it, which I definitely appreciate and enjoy, but also about like, this is a practice in my faith of like, I don't want to just be so siloed that I'm losing touch with what God is doing more broadly in the lives of students through schools.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. Love that. That's awesome. Sean?
Yeah, for me, it challenges me to kind of think outside of my box a little bit, and what I mean by that is you kind of mentioned this earlier, Douglas. The three of us on this podcast right now are all from different types of school. I'm fascinated that Sam does what she does from an online platform like that. That to me, like I'm still trying to wrap my brain around that a little bit,
Yeah.
but I think that's awesome because it shows you the ways just with some creativity that God can use all of these things for the advancement of his kingdom. And so where it challenges me is as a school leader, I want to make sure that we're doing things that our school is capable of doing to the
Yeah.
maximum of their potential.
Mhm.
But B, are we looking for those other opportunities that exist that other people are filling and they have the knowledge and the expertise and they've kind of charted the path a little bit, maybe before you start walking down that road. And so to have a group of people who can speak into that and kind of challenge and encourage you along the way, for me, it's really inspiring and it's something that I value a lot from this network.
That's good, man. Yeah, the value of learning from one another and then being stretched is, I think, definitely a value of this. So that's awesome. Lori?
Yeah, no, I would just echo everything that's both Sam and Sean have already said. But I think, yeah, it's just getting some great ideas, hearing from just some amazing people who have had great experiences. And, I was thinking about one of the last podcasts we had, or network meetings. And Sean, what you shared with what was going on with your students, I mean, I wanted to jump up with my pom-poms and do a cartwheel because I mean, it was so exciting to hear what God was doing. I think sometimes you feel the weight of the spiritual weight of the responsibility. It's not all on you, obviously, but you've got these kids and they're under your care. You get to speak into their lives, and that's a huge responsibility. And sometimes you get to plant the seeds, and sometimes you get to harvest them. But just to hear what you guys were doing and what God was doing through that retreat, I was like, that was amazing. I think that's the encouragement that we all need to hear sometimes is like, just keep going, keep fighting the good fight. Like you said, do not grow weary in doing good. And so I just appreciate that.
That's good. The body of Christ is a living organism, right? So just like any living organism, just like our bodies themselves, like when one part is hurting, we feel the entire thing. When one part is finding some type of refreshment, the entire body rejoices in that. So I think it's the same thing with what Sean is sharing and what we're all kind of talking about here is that we're all connected to one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. And so when a part of that body is rejoicing when a school is seeing this major work of God going on, you got to remember it's not what Sean has done. Yeah, he's planted the seeds and he's been faithful to the work, but it's what God's doing. And so I think sometimes not only can we silo, but we can also get competitive with one
Mhm.
another. And we don't necessarily mean to do that. I know I'm not great about that. Like I compare, I say, what's going on here? What's going on there? What's this school getting? It's a natural thing we can do, but this network hopefully will help us to say, hey, it's not really about this person's kingdom or it's all about the kingdom of God, and we're all a piece of this. And so, man, praise God that he's working at Sean's school in the way that he is. Praise God that I get to be a part of what's going on at this school, even though there might not be a lot of fruit that I'm seeing right now. I know I'm doing what God has called me to do. And that in and of itself is the reward, right? That I get to be a part of this work. So I've got to constantly remind myself of that as well, not only when I was at the school, but even just being a dad, right? Because it's
Mhm.
crazy. Um, hey, last question I want to ask, and then we'll wrap this time up. And again, I've so thankful you guys have taken the time to be here. I know you're busy, you got a lot going on. You're doing this during your workday, right? So thank you for doing this. Um, but hey, I want to ask this question, and Sean, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Sam, and then we'll end with Lori. As we kind of conclude this semester, we conclude this conversation within the Spiritual Formation Network. What encouragement, and this could be any type of encouragement, not just tied to what we talked about today, but what encouragement would you offer to school leaders who are trying to disciple students faithfully in today's cultural moment?
Mm.
Yeah, I think it can get exhausting, and a lot of times you feel like you're beating your head against a wall. But I think what God's been slowly teaching me over the years is that He is the God of everything,
Mm,
and He owns the moment. And so
yeah.
every moment, because He owns it, has the potential for eternal impact. And
Mm,
so approaching things in that way, even if it's just a small mundane task or something that feels really big, realizing that his sovereignty and his authority rules and reigns over all of that, and because of that one fact, that moment becomes eternally significant, no matter how big or small it is. And so, that for me personally makes me really want to steward those small and big things to the best of my ability. Just kind of giving it all to the Lord and trusting Him to do what only He can do.
that's a good word, Sean. Good word. Sam?
Okay. I thought about this a lot. So I think this is what I would like to say is that I think probably a lot of us feel the weight of like the billion-dollar industries that are fighting for the clicks and the attention of our students. And I think that we feel this pressure to often keep up with that. Like we have to be just as interesting and just as dynamic and all of this stuff. And I kind of want to just say like, set yourself free of all of that. Like I really, really believe that even this generation understands small is the new big, personal is the new impersonal, and slow
Mm,
is the new fast. Like
yeah.
we do not have to try to keep up with all of that mess. We don't. I don't think that even students actually in their bones want that from us, and so we
Mm,
can be free from that. Um, I think that really it's really about, Mother Teresa doing small things with great love, right? And so I think as
mhm,
much as we can call students out of the crowds, the more that I think this work can begin to flourish among us. And I think that we have to push against, I think, the grind to try to keep up with all of that and to just say, we are not that. If you want that, there are billion-dollar industries that would love for you to have that. We are calling you into a life of rhythm, and I think that's really what we can do as spiritual formation nourishers, is to provide that rhythm for students and for families and for faculty and staff.
Yeah, I love that, calling them into a life of rhythm. There's a lot to unpack just with what you just said there, Sam. But hey, thank you for sharing that. I think that's great encouragement for our leaders. Laurie, we're going to give the last piece of this to you.
Man, it's hard to follow these two, but
I know,
I would
right?
just
I know.
say,
I set you up for failure on this. Whoever was going to be last was going to have a hard
We're
time.
not comparing. We're not comparing.
That's right. That's right. We're all together in this.
No, I would just say, I love what you both said. And, sometimes I have to remind myself, it's not the 230 kids, it's ministering to the one, and that means that I have to be on my knees consistently, surrendering myself to the Lord to be able to really hear his voice, to use his eyes to see that student that needs me to come along beside him or her and, just say, hey, how's it going? And you can get lost in the sea of kids, but he has a purpose, and maybe it's just that one student today, but being able to, I think, just be spiritually sensitive to that and know that, Jesus left the 99 to go after the one. And it's not about the numbers. We always want to make it about the numbers sometimes and measure our effectiveness against the numbers, but sometimes it's just about being faithful to the one. So, that would be my encouragement.
That's right. Yeah. Hey, Jesus had 12 disciples. Within that, he had the three, and he walked with those three. And, if you look at John 6, he had a lot more following him at that point. So numbers wise, man, Jesus was doing it, right? He was awesome. And then he starts talking about, if you want to come and follow me, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they're like, what are you talking about? And so all these people who are just a little confused, but also already having a heart of disbelief and not really sure about this Jesus guy, they leave. Droves of people leave. And if people were to see that in today's culture, if you were to see that in a church, you'd be like, well, that church is not successful. That church must not be fruitful. And then Jesus looks at the 12 and he says, what about you? Are you guys going to leave? And Peter, chimes up one time. This is a good thing that Peter said, right? He a lot of times put his foot in his mouth. He says, where else are we going to go, Lord? You have the words of life. And so Jesus was he was simple in the way that he approached people. Yes, he was the God of the universe. Yes, he performed miracles. He healed people. We understand those things. But if you really watch the rhythms of his life, it was simple practices over a 3-year period of time that eventually changed the world. And so even as we're in our context today, and as we wrap up today, just encourage all of you in the same way that you've just encouraged me and encouraged our school leaders. For those of you who are listening to this and you're like, man, as all three on the call have said, I don't know if I can get all this done. There's so much burden, there's so much weight, there's so much responsibility. Hey, just one step at a time, right? Take those small steps in the right direction over a long period of time will bring change. Trust the process of the way that God works. Think about your own life. He works in our lives that way as well. And so, hey, again, Sam, Sean, Laurie, thank you so much. Seriously, you guys are all stars. I really appreciate you. I'm so glad I get to do this and ask you these questions, and it's kind of a part of my job. Like, that's really cool for me. But also that I get to know you, and you're not just people that I know as school leaders. And even though, other than Laurie, I haven't met Sean or Sam in person, we meet and connect virtually. I still feel like we're friends. Like you're no longer acquaintances. I would call you friends. And even though it's in the context of Christian education, we are brothers and sisters in Christ. And so I'm just thankful to walk alongside this journey with you. Hey, thank you so much for joining us today in this part of this conversation. For those of you guys who are listening or watching, thank you for being a part of the Grafted Together podcast. And hey, if you have not joined the Spiritual Formation Network, I think they made a great apologetic and defense as to why you should today.
Sign up.
So get online, go to acsi.org/spiritual formation. Jerry's going to give you some information about that as well at the end or at the beginning of this podcast. Join the network, be a part of it. Hey, because God is doing some great things in the space of Christian education. Hey, you three, thank you so much. Enjoy your time. Continue to do the work that God is doing at your schools. Thank you.
Grafted Together is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Learn more about biblical worldview and spiritual formation at acsi.org/graftedtogether.